Welcome back, everybody. This is episode 24, and this week we're going to talk about the third of the four market structures. This time we're going to talk about monopolistic competition. And you're going to find that this is a really short week in terms of the video lectures, but really a very interesting market structure in the sense that most small businesses actually operate in a monopolistically competitive environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, first of all, the characteristics of monopolistic competition, just a review of some of the stuff we did a couple of weeks ago. We are then going to look at how monopolistically competitive firms maximize their profits in the short run and in the long run. And we're going to look at some additional concepts related to monopolistic competition, specifically talking about things like non-price competition, advertising, whether it's good for the society or bad for the society. And then lastly, we're going to talk about something that's kind of a quirky aspect of this, something called Hotelling's paradox. So along those lines, we are going to start by remembering that there are four basic market structures. A couple weeks ago, we looked at Bob and how perfectly competitive firms operate. Last week, we looked at pure monopoly, which is how Mary operates when she's the only firm dominating a market. Most businesses don't lie in either extreme. They lie somewhere in the middle along this continuum. And so for this week, our topic is monopolistic competition. And our monopolistically competitive firm is going to be a restaurateur by the name of Luigi. Luigi runs an Italian restaurant in a big city. And so what is it that makes him monopolistically competitive? Well, if you recall, on page 2 of your note set, there is that table that we've seen several times. Monopolistic competition is the third column over there. And what we're talking about is an industry with a lot of firms. And they're all producing similar but not identical. That's the key here. Similar but not identical things. So what that means, of course, is that Luigi has a lot of people, a lot of competitors who are good substitutes. Not perfect substitutes, though. For Bob, every other producer had a perfect substitute for his wheat. For Mary, there are no substitutes at all. For Luigi, he's got a lot of close but not perfect substitutes for his product. And that means that when it comes to control over price of his product, he has a little bit, but not a lot. He is able, if he raises his price, let's say 5%, to not lose all of his sales. Bob would lose it all. Mary wouldn't lose very much at all. Luigi's going to lose quite a bit, but not everything, because some people are attached to his business. He's got something that sets him apart a little bit. Some people are loyal. They like the atmosphere. They like the food in a special way, whatever. And so he's not going to lose all of his sales. It's really easy for new firms to come and enter the business. Easy entry. There aren't those big barriers that we talked about last week. There aren't big patent rights or significant economies of scale or network monopolies or any of that jazz. But it's really easy to start up your own restaurant and do those kinds of things. And these kinds of firms are going to spend a lot of money, a lot of emphasis on trademarking and branding and locations and the story of setting themselves apart. A lot of advertising, a lot of marketing going on here. So what I showed you last time was a phone book, that old antique. And basically, as I was flipping through the yellow pages for a big city phone book, everything in there was monopolistically competitive, right? Whether it was roofing contractors or plumbers or childcare services or veterinarians or dentists, or the list goes on. Right, the story was it fit into this category. They maximize profits like everybody else. MR equals MC, no money left on the table. And you can see the rest of this, and we'll obviously go back and compare some of this toward the end of this section, but those other characteristics. One word of caution, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but I'm going to reiterate it here. This term is confusing. Monopolistic competition. And a lot of students say, well, what do you mean? Is it monopoly or is it competition? The answer is yes. It's combination, but importantly, your English says that the adjective here is monopolistic, and it describes the competition. So it's competitive, very, very competitive, but not perfectly so. It's got a little bit of monopoly power. I hate the term too, but it is what it is. And if you think about it along the continuum, it kind of helps you remember this is really competitive. It's closer to Bob than it is to Mary. Okay? So, what do we know about Luigi in terms of his profit maximizing behavior? Well, again, I said this week's going to be kind of quick because if you look at the next page, you'll see that he asks the same questions, the 3, maybe 4. questions that Bob and Mary do, and the answers are the same. His cost curves look exactly the same as the other firms do because they're based on productivity functions, not based on control over the market. And then the only thing that's different is his revenue picture. Okay? His revenue, his demand and marginal revenue curves look a little different than the others. Remember for Bob that his demand curve was perfectly elastic because he was a price taker. For Mary, her demand curve was very inelastic because she's a price setter and had no close substitutes. For Luigi, in the graph that you have provided there, right, all you need to recognize is that the demand that he faces is pretty darn elastic, but not perfectly so, right? It's pretty flat. And the reason that that demand or price line is really flat is because if he raises his price a little, he loses a lot of sales because people have other places to go to eat instead of Luigi's. That means that his demand is relatively elastic. It also means that his marginal revenue is not equal to the price like it was for Bob. And also in a situation like where marginal revenue looked like this, I'm mumbling for Mary, but for Luigi, his marginal revenue curve is twice as steep as his demand curve, just a lot flatter than it is for Mary's situation. Okay? Why is marginal revenue less than the price, except at the first unit? And the answer is because we're assuming right now that Luigi cannot perfectly price discriminate. He can't charge different prices to different people for the exact same good. Yes, so all of his units at the same price. Okay? So if you look to the next page already, we are flipping through this. This is a short week in terms of video lectures. You've got some other projects to be working on, and that's fine. But if you look at the costs on the next page, they're the exact same graphs. The short run and long run costs look exactly like they did before, right? The spoon and 2 bowls in the short run, and the spoon and 1 bowl in the long run when everything is variable. And on the next page, page 5, you'll see a repeat of the 3 and maybe 4 questions and their answers. And this is exactly the same as what you saw before. So then we are already at page 6. Like I said, this is going to be a very, very quick week. But if you look at page 6, we're going to say, you know, what's the short run profit outcome going to look like for Luigi? And then we'll look at the long run in just a couple of minutes. And we can do this very quickly because we've done this process a bunch of times for the other structures. And the only thing that's different is that the demand curve is really flat, really elastic. So there's a question there. In the short run, right, remember the rule is produce where MR equals MC, or the last unit where MR is just greater than MC, as long as you're covering your variable costs. Otherwise, you'll shut down in the short run. But there's a question that says, will a monopolistically competitive firm like Luigi be able to make an economic profit in the short run? And the answer is, yeah, it's possible. Could make a positive profit or a 0 profit or lose money but operate or shut down. So there's 4 cases like all the other firms. So the answer is maybe. Right? So let's look at case number 1. Here's case number 1. Luigi's got a demand curve that's very elastic. That's his price line. And he's got a marginal revenue that's also very elastic, twice as steep as his demand. And then you've got marginal costs that look something like this. And he has an average total cost curve that dips below the demand curve in this example, hits its minimum at marginal, and then starts to rise. That average variable is down here somewhere. Okay? So he's going to ask himself 3 questions. He likes to talk to himself. He's an Italian pizza guy. I don't know what that meant. That was ridiculous. But anyway, the story is he's going to ask output. How much should he produce to maximize profits? And by now you're sick of this, but MR equals MC is where there's no more money on the table. So that happens right here, where MR equals MC, and that's Q star. And then he says, well, what price should I charge? And the answer is demand curve, right? Read up to the demand curve to figure out the maximum price you can charge, P star. And then you got to calculate profits. But profits are the difference between price per unit and cost per unit times the number of units. So for Q star, read up to ATC and track it over. And you know that because price is greater than the cost per unit, he's making positive economic profits. It looks like all of the other graphs we did, right? It's just that the demand and marginal revenue are really flat. So he's making a little bit of excessive money here. What's going to happen over time, though, if in the short run he's making a bunch of profits? Yeah, other firms are going to come in and say, I can do that. And they're going to start up restaurants and compete away some of those excess profits till they go back to zero. But this is a short run possibility, as is the second graph. In the second graph, we have a situation for Luigi that looks like this. Here's his elastic demand curve and his elastic marginal revenue curve. And suppose he's got marginal cost, the spoon that looks like that, and his average total cost dips down here, touches the demand curve, just kisses it, then hits its minimum at marginal and starts to rise. Okay, so it kisses demand right here and then keeps on falling until it bottoms out at marginal and then starts to go up. And then average total, or excuse me, average variable cost, my bad, is down there. Going to ask himself 3, maybe 4, in this case 3 questions. It's going to produce output, first question, where MR equals MC. That's Q star. Price he's going to charge is the highest he can, which is on the demand curve, right up here where they touch. That's P star. Third question is profits. Well, you got to compare price and average total cost, which for Q star is the same thing as the price. So his economic profits here are 0. Not a bad thing at all, right? He's making as much here as he could in any other use of his time, and so resources are being used efficiently. That's fine, no problem whatsoever. Okay? So those are 2 possibilities in the short run. There are 2 more, and we'll draw those quickly just for a little bit of additional practice on this before moving on to a couple of additional topics. So if you didn't flip the page yet, please do so. Page number 7, we are moving right along here. And the third possibility is that he's losing money, but he's going to operate, continue to produce in the short run. And that's because he's covering his variable costs, but not his total costs. So here's your demand and marginal revenue, very elastic, because there's lots of good substitutes for Luigi's, not perfect substitutes, but good substitutes. His marginal cost looks like that, but his average total costs are higher than his price line. So his costs are high relative to his demand. But his average variable costs dip under the demand curve, right? So they go down underneath the demand curve, and then they start to rise when they hit marginal. So he's going to do 3, in this case 4, questions. He's going to look where MR equals MC to get Q star. He's going to charge the highest price he can, which is on the demand curve, P star. And then for profits, he's going to compare that to his average total cost, which is way up here. So you got to go to Q star, read all the way up from there. That's what students sometimes don't do correctly, to the ATC level. And so what you see is that if he produces, he loses this red shaded area. That's his negative economic profit, or his loss, if he produces. And he will produce here, because if he shut down, he would lose more, right? Here's his average variable cost. So his average fixed cost is this distance. And he would lose that times the number of units. He'd lose the blue area if he shut down. He'd rather lose the red area and produce Q star, okay? So there's one more case. That's the 4th case, possibility number 4. And I'm going to let you do that one on your own time. But if you drew that, you would see it's a situation where the average cost curves are both above the demand curve. And so it'd be better off to just produce 0, shut down, and lose your total fixed costs. So that should all be largely a review, just with a slightly different demand curve and marginal revenue picture. All right, so that's the short run situation. What's going to happen in the long run for Luigi in this monopolistically competitive environment? Is he going to be able to make positive profits in the long run? Is he going to be able to make a killing in the long run? No, he's not, right? Absolutely, positively not. Why? Well, he's not going to be able to make excessive profits because new firms can come in and compete with him, right? And say, I can do that. There's no big barriers. You don't have anything special here that I can't replicate or come up with close enough a competition to take away some of your excess profits. And so the answer is, in the long run, profits will go to zero. So in a quick graph, that would look something like the following. We'd have a situation where his demand curve, pretty elastic, marginal revenue. And in the long run, it would be where we've got the following, that long run marginal cost is here. An average cost in the long run, his planning curve is LRAC, looks like this. And I missed a little bit. Sorry about that. There's his LRAC. And so what's happening, and they just touch each other, is that in the long run, where MR equals MC, Q star, he's going to produce at a price up here, which is just equal to his long run average cost, and economic profits will indeed be forced to zero. It might take a little while to get there. It's not as strong as in perfect competition, but there are relentless pressures in a freely operating market to go to that particular position. Okay? So indeed, there are those pressures to push profits relentlessly toward zero. We've got just a couple of additional topics here before we end this week's lectures. And the first one is the question in the middle of page 8 there. Is monopolistic competition good for our society and economy or not? And the answer is yes and no. I love those answers, right? The answer is it depends. The first answer is no, it's not good. And the reason is because if you think about it and look at this, right? If this was competitive, supply and demand would say, here's where we want to be. Remember, this would be the supply curve under competition. But because the monopolistically competitive firm has a little bit of power, he will produce less and charge more. And so if you're filling in the blanks, Luigi's going to charge a higher price and produce less output than would be the case under perfect competition, thus generating some inefficiency. And again, like I just said in this picture, what we would have if we did the welfare analysis is we'd see that there indeed is deadweight loss. There's inefficiency generated because consumers lose at the expense of the producer, and the overall society loses because we get less output and we have to pay more for it. Okay, so there's money that is completely wasted or deadweight loss. One good thing, and that's the last little bullet point there, is that the deadweight loss is less under monopolistic competition than it would be under Mary's pure monopoly situation, okay? Because the distortion is less. This is pretty close to Bob, pretty close to perfect competition, but not completely so. What's another reason why? So if you turn to the next page, what's another reason why monopolistic competition may not be the best for the society? Well, if you think about the restaurant industry or the coffee shop industry or lots of service industries in small towns, there's always a lot of businesses that are above capacity or under capacity, right? That they're not actually being fully utilized. And so from an economic perspective, that's wasteful. Economists call the problem chronic excess capacity, right? It's a chronic problem of having a situation where we've got all this capacity, but it's not being fully utilized. So, in a big city, a hotel industry, for example, hotels might have a typical occupancy rate of maybe 50 to 60% on a typical night. That's waste, right, of scarce resources in an economic sense. Or, a new restaurant comes up in town, everybody's got to eat there, and the story is it's the hot place, you stand in line forever, to get access to eat there, and then a few weeks later, other restaurants open up, and they're loaded, but the previous ones are, sitting with half their tables empty in a given night. That's chronic excess capacity. So in that sense, there's waste from a societal perspective, and we have monopolistic competition. And the reason that there's waste is that it's too easy from a social perspective to get into this market, right? If you want to start up your own business, this is where you're going to land. And the problem is the markets get oversaturated, and therefore we have a situation where many of them indeed do fail. That's not the case with Bob. That's not the case with Mary, but it is the case with Luigi and monopolistically competitive industries. Okay, they're always producing at a situation where they can never get to the lowest cost, and where they're going to be in a situation where there's too much capacity in the market. And then the last no here, this isn't the most exciting week, I know, but you've got some other things you're working on. The last no answer as to why monopolistic competition is not necessarily good is because there's a ton of money spent on advertising, which may not really help the overall economy. If you think about it, here's the arguments. Advertising usually just tells us that we should do something and persuade us to do it without actually giving us any new information. So it plays with our mind in ways that doesn't actually allow us to make better choices. It just convinces us that, and persuades us that we need to do this if we want to be cool or whatever. That's not really information enhancing, and so if that's the case, then that's wasteful. Second argument is that advertising, could be good if it enhanced competition and created, better competition, better products, better services, and all that. But in reality, oftentimes advertising just enhances concentration of power, actually creates more monopoly power if that advertising is done particularly well. And we know that whenever there's more market power, there's more deadweight loss. And so it could be a bad thing because there's so much money spent on advertising. And then the last argument about advertising on the negative side, we'll look at the positives in just a second for all of you marketers out there and economists as well. But the other negative is that in some ways it's sort of a wash, right? Everybody feels they have to advertise just to try to maintain their market share. And so if everybody advertises and in the end we don't have any more total business, then the answer is we all just spent money that didn't help anybody except the marketing folks, and didn't really help the society in terms of anything that was meaningful. So the answer is sometimes monopolistic competition is not that great for society, right? But the other answer is sometimes it really is. And there's not an easy story here. One reason that it's good, if you think about it, is that in the restaurant industry in a big city, I got a lot of choices. There are tons of different alternatives that have things that are similar but not identical. So depending on what my particular preferences are, with all of those choices, I can potentially come up with a better match. And that means that I'm going to have my needs and the business's needs met more efficiently, and that's good for the society. So choices are usually a good thing. Sometimes too many choices are not. And perhaps you did that when you looked at behavioral economics earlier in the class. But the second argument, real quick, why monopolistic competition could be good is the advertising story. Because if advertising does create new information and allows us to make better decisions with the information we have, then that's beneficial to the society, right? The ones that aren't, the businesses that aren't doing what we need and we get that information can help us to have those go out of business and the good ones to maintain and stay in business. It could enhance competition, like we talked about earlier. If advertising is done well, it actually makes the businesses come up with new and better ways of doing things. That could be very good, right, in a competitive way. And it also enlarges market size. So if a firm does get bigger because of great advertising, they may be able to produce at lower costs due to those economies of scale. The question then is, do they just take the profit for themselves, or do they pass it on, and what's the deadweight loss to the society? But there is that argument that says, hey, it allows for economies of scale that would never exist if we didn't advertise and get bigger. So those are the arguments. And the answer is it depends as to whether monopolistic competition is good or bad. It's yes and no. Okay? And then the last little bit here is just to talk more about advertising and the pros and cons when it comes to monopolistic competition. And I just want you to look at the top of page 10, the last page in this note set, and think about what the goal is when it comes to advertising. If you're Luigi and you're running this restaurant and you have a demand curve that looks like this, right? What are you trying to do by putting money out there into an advertising marketing campaign? Well, you're really trying to do two things. right? A lot of times people will say, well, your goal is to change preferences so that you can increase the demand. Shift it to the right. And that's one thing. So the first blank to put is you definitely want to increase the demand for your product, right? So you want to increase the demand. And you can draw that in the graph here. But the story is, I don't just want to do that, right? I want to convince people that there aren't good substitutes for my product to make them less sensitive to my pricing decisions. So what I want to do is not only move this thing out, but I actually want to make the demand become more inelastic, right? I want to rotate it so that when I raise my price, I don't lose much sales. People are loyal to me. They're like, hey man, you got the best, pasta in town. You're the only place I'll ever eat kind of story. And that's your goal. So you want to increase demand, but also make the demand more inelastic. So second blank is to make the demand more inelastic, less sensitive to price. And that's your objective. And to the extent to which you're successful or not, will change your revenue picture relative to your costs and talk about your profitability opportunities. Okay. I got one more observation here about monopolistic competition, and then we'll call it a week actually. This is a short week in terms of the videos again. And that is, there's an interesting aspect of monopolistic competition called Hotelling's paradox. Hotelling was an economist, and he observed this a long time ago, but I think about it every time that I go to the food court at Easttown Mall, or think about, buying a used or new car from the dealers in the Madison area, or go to a big city and see that on the four corners of a busy intersection there are 4 gas stations. And if you think about that, you ask yourself, well, why is that paradoxical? So hopefully you wrote some examples down, and then I'll talk, so I'll slow down a little bit here. The food court at the mall, gas stations on the corners of a busy intersection, car dealerships all next to each other. Oftentimes in cities you got cinemas that are next to each other, stuff like that. And so those are examples. So what is Hotelling's paradox? What's the puzzle here? Because that's what paradox means, right? What's the apparent puzzle? The apparent puzzle is that you would think that you want to set yourself apart from your competitors, right? Every business wants to be unique and set themselves apart. But the puzzle is then why do you end up often mimicking the behavior of your competitors, right? So the puzzle is, why do monopolistically competitive firms often mimic the behavior of their competitors So why do monopolistically competitive firms often mimic the behavior of their competitors when they're trying to set themselves apart from their competitors? So why do monopolistically competitive firms often mimic the behavior of their competitors when they're trying to set themselves apart from their competitors? That's Hotelling's paradox. Sometimes it's called the principle of minimum differences, but I'll usually call it Hotelling's paradox. And what's the answer to that, right? Why do monopolistically competitive firms behave this way? Why do all of those restaurants, those fast food restaurants, locate right next to each other in the mall? Why do all those car dealerships locate right next to each other out by, Eastgate Cinema or about by the Beltline and Todd Drive area? Why do we have situations where, again, gas stations often locate on the corners, 4 corners of the same busy intersection? What's the answer to that? What's the resolution of the paradox? Well, the resolution of the paradox is you need to get a critical mass first and then convince people to buy yours. And so what I mean by that is, when we think about the food court, we want people to know that when individual firms advertise and everybody knows the food court's there, a lot of people are going to say, hey, let's go out to eat tonight. Let's go to the food court because there's lots of choices. one individual firm can never get that much of a crowd or that much foot traffic through that area by their business, but together they can. In fact, they can get more than they could ever do individually. The sum of the parts is greater than the individual parts, or the total is greater than the sum of the individual parts. That's what I meant to say. And the story is that they want people to say, hey, let's go out to eat. And then when they get you there, they want to convince you to buy from their restaurant, right? So, you know, at the end of the month, I'm sure some of you have done this. You go to the mall, right? You walk by there and somebody's out there, 3 orange chicken, anybody? 3 orange chicken? Want the 3 orange chicken? Right? Yeah, to survive at the end of the month with that once in a while. But the story is that they're trying to convince you once they get you there to buy their product that it's better. Same thing, you know, hey, I'm looking for a car. Well, there's where the car dealerships are, right? So I go out there, and then once I get there, got this huge volume of traffic, then I've got to convince people to buy from me, right? So you have to, the resolution is that you need to get a large group of customers to come to your business area and then convince them to buy from you. And because there's a lot of competitors near you, you've got a better odds of doing that. Or at least it improves your possibilities. Right? So you need to get a large group of customers, a critical mass, if you will, to come to your business area, where those other businesses also are, and then convince them to buy from you. 3 orange chicken, anyone. Okay, so that ends episode 24. That ends the video lectures for this week on the model of monopolistic competition. It is where most small businesses reside. We've already developed the basic principles of profit maximization across all firms. The new stuff had to do with an elastic demand curve because of the lots of substitutes for Luigi's pasta, and the story about some of these quirky aspects related to non-price competition, advertising, location, and Hotelling's paradox. So that's the end of this week. Have a good one.